Welcome, everybody. My name is Ted Merman. I'm the director of the Center for Consumer Law and Economic Justice here at the law school. I teach consumer protection law. I want to acknowledge CAPS, the Consumer Advocacy Protection Society, and the office over here in the corner, our co-sponsors for today's event. And we're going to do a little consumer research here. I just want to know from all of you if you noticed the RSVP request. How many of you RSVP? Okay, raise your hand if you didn't RSVP but figured I'm going anyway. There'll probably be stuff. Excellent, okay. We're trying to figure out if that's a good way of predicting how much food we need. We don't want to waste food. We don't want to have too little food. So we're working on it. Thank you for that. On to substance. We have actually a number of honored guests in the room, folks from LRAP, from the last few weeks. Explaining that, let's just say seismic changes in the public service loan forgiveness program, in other aspects of student lending, and what those mean to you, to all of us, as well as what it means to the rest of a lot of other people in this country, is the subject of today's talk. We have very briefly, I will tell you, we have with us three, to use a legal term of art, mucky mucks in the field of student loan law. First, we have Persis Yu from the National Consumer Law Center. The National Consumer Law Center is the think tank, as well as advocacy organization for consumer law. They are located in Boston and in Washington. And Persis is their leading person on student loan law. So when you read those New York Times articles and it says Persis Yu said, this is Persis Yu. We also have with us today Mike Pierce from the Student Borrower Protection Center. This is the leading NGO in this country dedicated to student loan law and policy. Mike is not only a mucky muck there, he was a mucky muck at the CFPB, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, in the Student Loan Ombuds Office, and a mucky muck on Capitol Hill. He actually helped to create the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program. So thank you, Mike. You're getting a round of applause here. And as our moderator, as the MC for today's event, we have our own Professor Jonathan Glater. Jonathan is one of the leading academic experts on student loan law in this country. He has been at UC Irvine, he's been at UCLA. We are just over the moon delighted to have him here with us at Berkeley Law starting this year. He is the faculty director of the Center for Consumer Law and Economic Justice. And it gives me great pleasure to introduce Mr. Jonathan Glater.
So Ted already introduced our speakers. That means you don't have to hear that much from me beyond thanking you for joining us in person and virtually. There are just a couple of background issues I want to share, and then some additional introductions that I want to enable with a little more specificity. Student loans, right? I paid mine off. Some of you are probably still incurring them with the prospect of repayment for between 10 and 25 years hence. So this is a topic of immediate relevance. One of the immediate drivers of this convening today is to talk about the implications of the announcement by one student loan servicer, right? So the servicer is the entity that's actually keeping track of payments, that is pursuing borrowers seeking payment, has decided not to renew its contract with the Federal Department of Education. meaning that students whose loans were serviced by one entity are going to be serviced by we don't know who yet. The same entity, this same servicer is also the administrator of public service loan forgiveness. Some of you may have seen in some of the articles that had mentioned that upwards of 98% of applicants for public service loan forgiveness were denied, which is a high denial rate, right? And there's been extensive criticism of how this servicer handled public service loan forgiveness. So these are some of the more immediate topics in the student loan space right now. We anticipate federal rulemaking on public service loan forgiveness in the coming months. And of course, there's this tantalizing prospect of broad-based student loan cancellation, right? Elimination of the obligation to repay that is still out there. So we're at a really dynamic moment in student loan law, both at the structural level and for individual borrowers. So before I hand it over to our speakers, each is going to talk for 10 or 15 minutes and give an overview, and then we'll have an open discussion. Those of you who are watching on Zoom, please feel free to post questions in the chat. I also want to give an opportunity to another source of local expertise of very immediate relevance to you guys, which is members of our financial aid office who are here. So I just want to pause and give you a moment to introduce yourselves. You guys should all know these people if you don't already.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Glater. Hi, everyone. I'm Ellen Again, I'm the Director of Financial Aid here. So our office is located on the second floor, just right around the corner from the admissions office. We look forward to partnering with you if you haven't already come to talk with us about any questions, concerns about your student loans or loan repayment. Look forward to partnering with you on that. Don't be a stranger. We're real people. We get it. So please feel free to stop by anytime.
I'm Amanda Pursoon. I'm the Associate Director of our Loan Repayment Assistance Program for grads working in public interest and public service. I'm dealing with people who have gotten PSLF, who are applying for PSLF, who want to do PSLF right now, and who are with Fed Loan Servicing and have to transfer over. So I'm happy to talk about how these changes might affect your loan specifically or what you're going to do after graduation. So like Ellen said, just stop by our office or email me or make an appointment.
Hi everybody, my name is Jorge Naganya. I'm Associate Director of Financial Aid. Yeah, anything financial aid, finance related, please stop by. You should always feel welcome into our office, and anything that we can help you with, we'll do that. And if we're not the department to help you, we'll find the appropriate people to do that. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to hand it over first to Persis Yu. I will give your full title as promised here, Persis, in one sentence. The Director of the Student Loan Borrower Assistance Project at the National Consumer Law Center, where she has worked for the past decade, representing the interests of low-income student loan borrowers to the Department of Education, Congress, and the courthouse. She doesn't mention how often she's in the media. She's often also in the media, as Ted mentioned. And then she will be followed by Mike Pierce, Policy Director and Managing Counsel at the Student Borrower Protection Center, an attorney, advocate, former senior regulator who joined the Student Borrower Protection Center after more than a decade, advocating on behalf of student loan borrowers in Capitol Hill and at the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. So Persis, with that, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thanks, Jonathan. And belatedly, thanks, Ted. I have to say, I think that's the first time I've ever been called a muckety muck, but at least I'm only one, whereas Mike gets to be three. Thanks everyone for letting me join you today and for taking time out of your lunch to listen about the student loan system. I think it's a fascinating time to be talking about this topic. As Ted and Jonathan have both mentioned, it's a huge moment right now. We're in a huge moment where there's seismic things happening. And so I'm going to give kind of like the high level overview of the things that are happening. And I think Mike's going to talk more about like public service loan forgiveness, which I know you all are really more interested in. But so the things that are going on right now, right? Like in the world of student loans, that's keeping me and Mike super busy and keeping us from sleeping every night. So like one of the big things happening is that right now the student loan system is paused, or at least for some borrowers, the student loan system is paused. So we have this payment suspension where, collection agencies aren't collecting from defaulted borrowers. Your general servicers are not taking loans payments unless borrowers want to make payments, and that time is supposed to count towards income during payment, a program designed to keep payments affordable and provide cancellation after a certain amount of time. And that time is also supposed to count towards public service loan forgiveness. This payments have been paused since March of 2020, and that is currently slated to end in at the end of January. So the other huge thing going on, right, is that Fed Loan Servicing has exited the system. Fed Loan Servicing is a huge servicer, servicing approximately 8 million student loan borrowers. So all of those student loan borrowers are going to need to find a new servicing home. And that's also, there are two smaller servicers that have also left as well. So Granite State is a smaller servicer. Utah, about a year ago, also left the student loan system. So we have kind of this mass exodus of servicers leaving the federal student loan portfolio. Rulemaking coming up. A lot of the programs that dictate the rules around federal student loans are up for renegotiation. Pro tip, if you're planning on doing policy advocacy, take admin law. I did not, and I regret it. So, that would be really helpful right now. But the Department of Education has to engage in this negotiated rulemaking process to write its regulations. And so that starts in about a week and a half. And is a several month long process where a committee drafts new regulations around income during payment, around public service loan forgiveness, a lot of the discharge programs designed to protect borrowers if their school defrauds them, the rules around when we can cancel loans for folks in disabilities. And then we, of course, are very engaged in a campaign to try to cancel as much student loan debt as we possibly can. So that's somewhat the landscape of what is happening right now, right at this moment. And just to step back for a second, I want to talk about why do we care about these things that are happening? So first of all, talking about the federal student loan portfolio, right? It's a huge portfolio. There's 43 million borrowers who have federal student loans. There's $1.8 trillion of total student loan debt, and about 90% of that belongs to is federally held or guaranteed. So the rules of the road for what happens with these loans impact a lot of folks. And basically, it's not the entirety of the market, but it is the biggest player in the market, obviously. So what happens is going to impact all of us. Student loans are sold in large part to, as a millennial issue, a young people's issue. But it actually, in our experience, it impacts a lot more folks than that. Older borrowers, or I take that back. Just looking at the age portfolio, the number of borrowers who are over 35 is half of the portfolio. So this is not just a young people's issue. And actually, one of the fastest growing populations is folks over 60. So it is an intergenerational problem impacting a lot of folks. And one of the things that doesn't get captured in these numbers is some of the community effect of this debt, right? So what it doesn't say is whose parent is helping their kid pay for college, right? Whose aunt is helping, fund this stuff? Who, what student loan borrowers are sending money to their parents? So there's a lot of stuff not captured in these numbers. Student loan debt is a gender issue, a gender justice issue. 2/3 of student loan borrowers are women. It's a racial justice issue. Black borrowers borrow more to go to school, and they have a harder time paying it back. If you can believe that we have a racial wealth gap and a pay disparity in this country, that makes it harder for both women and people of color to pay back their loans. And the numbers show that Black borrowers, in fact, default on their loans twice as much as their white peers do. So that's a little roadmap. Oh, and I guess you should care about this also because, as I understand, a lot of you also have student loans yourself. So the things that get negotiated in the next, the next couple months are probably going to have a huge role on what happens when you all leave school. And I think, looking back at what is the impact these different changes are going to have on folks, right? We have this system where we have a lot of loans that need to be transferred. About 10 million loans need to be transferred. They need to be transferred fast, by the way, because the Fed loan servicing contract ends in December. I don't think they're not all going to be transferred before December. That I think is physically impossible, but they need to be transferred soon. So we have servicers are going to be intaking this influx of borrowers. And while simultaneously we are going to restart repayment for approximately 30 million borrowers, which is a thing, you know, that we haven't actually done before. We have never paused the system for almost 2 years and then turned it back on. So you have these two things going on simultaneously, and I think really the big question is like, what could possibly go wrong, right? What could go wrong when you're trying to do two really huge things at once that you've never done before simultaneously? And I think the other piece that's actually hasn't been talked about is, you know, the general context of like what's going on in the world, right? So we have COVID is still here. We have the Delta variant. We don't know where that's going to go. We also have labor shortages, right? So one of the things that's going to happen with these servicers is that they are going to have to ramp up their staffing in order to take on this influx of new accounts. They're also going to, there's been analysis suggesting that they're going to have an influx of calls, which makes total sense, right? If you haven't made payments in 2 years, you don't know how much you need to pay. You don't know who you need to send the payment to. A lot of folks are probably aren't even going to know that repayments are starting at all. So they're going to miss their payments. So we anticipate that there's going to be a big backlog of folks. You know, it's going to be, you know, your worst nightmare calling Comcast trying to get your student loans turned back on. So this is some of the stuff that's like kind of happening, which is then put in this bigger context of like the student loan system has been broken for a really long time. And that gets us to kind of our cancellation campaign and negotiated rulemaking. Unfortunately, there's just so much distress in the student loan market itself. Prior to the pandemic, about 1 in 4 student loan borrowers was behind on their student loan payments. So that's before we have any of the, you know, catastrophic economic distress that we're going through right now. Programs have not been working as designed. Mike will talk about public service loan forgiveness. I've been super focused on income during payment. Income during payment is the program that, like I mentioned before, right? It's supposed to be affordable pathway out of debt. It is supposed to calculate your payments based upon your income. And then after 20 or 25 years of payments, it will cancel the amount of debt that is remaining. The problems with that have been, you know, folks don't learn about this program, so they missed out. Folks had the wrong kind of loan, so they miss out. There's paperwork that gets lost. So again, they miss out, or it's not affordable. So we did analysis actually with Mike and his folks at the Student Borrower Protection Center to look at how many people are actually benefiting from income during payment. The first iteration of income during payment plans was started in 1994. So we've surpassed the 25 years. So we should be seeing people getting cancellation under income during payment. And the data that we obtained from the Department of Education showed the number was 32. 32 out of about 4.5 million borrowers who've been in repayment longer than 20 years. So it's a pretty small percentage. I think it's like a decimal, like, you know, a couple decimal points away from 1%. And it's been working really abysmally. So we have just this kind of built up debt that's weighing down. A lot of it, frankly, is just never going to get paid off. And so we have this debt weighing down our system. We need to do these massively huge things in the next couple months to get the system running again, which leads us to, like, you know, frankly, we just got to get rid of it all. Let's get rid of a lot of this debt. Let's do some widespread debt cancellation. Clear out, especially, you know, I mean, the simplest way to do it is to pick a dollar amount and clear out, which will clear out a lot of the hardest to serve debt. Some of the most struggling borrowers actually have some of the lowest debt amounts. So, you know, our proposal has been like, what you need to do is you just need to clear the books. You need to clear the books of folks who've been in payment for, you know, 15, 20 years. You need to clear the books of people who should have been getting relief under all these programs all along. And then you need to provide widespread cancellation because you just don't want to miss folks who need the help. But then that gets us to the rulemaking of like, but then let's make the system better. If we're going to keep using debt, which I think is an open question whether we should, but if you're going to keep doing it, the system has to work. And so that's a bit of what we're trying to accomplish during the rulemaking. And so I think that brings me to a little bit over my 10 minutes. So I'll pass it off to Mike to talk about what he's doing there.
Awesome. And I thought that was an awesome overview of the student debt crisis, how we got here. And as is often the case, Persis was too modest. She is not only an expert in the education department's negotiated rulemaking process, she's also imminently going to be a negotiator at the table writing the new rules for the student loan system. So if you have grievances, send them that way. I don't know if I'm pointing the right direction here, but I wanted to do a deeper dive on, I think, both the law, like what it means as a lawyer that cares about consumer law issues to care about student debt, and then to use the public service loan forgiveness program and all of the problems with it as a case study. So as Persis mentioned, there's lots of ways out of debt. Our shared advocacy work is focused on helping as many people as possible figure out this Byzantine system and connect the dots between their rights under higher education law to a debt-free future and the outcome they want, which is actually having that debt-free future. And most people can't get from A to B. There's a lot of reasons why that happens. We'll talk about some of them. We won't talk about others. I'll answer questions maybe if there are any. But this distance between A and B, the distance between the rights you have under the Higher Education Act and your experience in the student loan system, whether that's getting accurate information about making an income-driven repayment, or even that you have a right to make payments based on your income, or whether that's just like having your payments counted correctly or processed properly. This gap in between your rights to get loan forgiveness or to get an affordable payment and the struggles that you have getting there, that's consumer law. That's the set of rights that you have under federal and state law that protect you from unfair practices, from being lied to. And in some cases, they actually tell student loan companies how they're supposed to treat you fairly, affirmative rights to get accurate information, or to have a payment processed in a timely manner, or to just be able to get a second opinion if something looks wrong. So as a consumer lawyer, Persis and I both spent a lot of our time thinking about how to use the laws that fill that gap there, the way that ensures that the system works for you, how to use those laws to protect student loan borrowers' rights. And when things don't go wrong, often that means that companies have been following all of these other laws, not just following your rights under higher education law. When things do go wrong, which is sadly most of the time, not only have these companies broken promises the government makes to you under higher education law, they've also probably broken a bunch of other federal and state laws, and often those laws are privately enforceable. So when we talk about what it means to be a student loan lawyer, what it means to go to law school, become a lawyer, and spend your days protecting student loan borrowers' rights, that's often being a consumer lawyer. It's not just admin law, all of the really important regulatory things that Persis talked about. And it's a little funny that I'm the one that's describing this to you, because Persis is the actual practicing shoe leather student loan lawyer. I have spent my whole career doing administrative law, but it is enforcing those rights under federal and state consumer law against the private companies that are cheating you out of things like income-driven repayment and public service loan forgiveness. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about PSLF specifically. How we got here, why it's a national scandal, why it's become something of a disgrace, what we're going to do about it. But at a couple of these key inflection points, I'm going to come back to this idea that if the companies responsible for delivering debt relief to public service workers had followed consumer law, we wouldn't be in this mess. So public service loan forgiveness, for those of you that have not had the misfortune of trying to navigate this mess of a program, is pretty simple in its conception. It says if you have the right kind of student loan, a federal direct loan, and you enroll in the right kind of payment plan, which is generally an income-driven repayment plan, like Persis mentioned, and you work in public service, and the definition of public service is super broad. It's actually a quarter of the US workforce works in public service based on the definitions in the law. That's anybody that works for any government agency, federal, state, local, any school district. If you serve in the armed forces, you work in public service. If you work for any 501c3 nonprofit. And then there's like something of a tail in the nonprofit sector that we won't spend time on. But for everyone else, it doesn't matter what you do. You don't have to be engaged in direct services. You don't have to be a nurse working at the bedside or a public defender serving in a courtroom. You just have to work for a public service organization. So anything you do for that nonprofit hospital, you could be in the back office as an accountant. Anything you do for the Department of Justice, you could be working in a clerical position. You could never have contact with clients. That is all considered public service work under the definitions in the law. And lots of borrowers have been denied their rights to loan forgiveness based on arbitrary decisions around what's in and what's out on public service, or miscounting payments, or information provided to them about what payment plan counts or what loan types count. And I'll talk about each of those in turn for just a second, but the most important thing I think to know if you're thinking about your own loans and your own career trajectory is that if you check those boxes on the first day of work, make sure you have the right type of loan, make sure you're enrolled in income-driven repayment, make sure your organization is a public service organization within the meaning of the law. From that point, you can kind of set your automatic payments, do your paperwork every year, and forget about it. And the biggest reason why public service loan forgiveness has failed a generation of public service workers is that each of these seemingly simple requirements were not really put in place in a way that was actionable for people back at the beginning when the program was first created. And at every step of the way after that, the student loan industry has been lying to borrowers about what their rights are. And that's how we kind of bring this back full circle to this discussion of what consumer law is, what it means to be treated fairly by a private financial services company that's responsible for handling your student loan, what it means to be able to repay your loans free of deception and misrepresentation. When a student loan company tells you the wrong information about what repayment plan you need to get on track for public service loan forgiveness, or because it's in their financial interest to keep you as a customer, they don't tell you you need to take these extra steps to go to some other student loan company to get on track for PSLF. Those aren't just denying you your right to loan forgiveness under the Higher Education Act. It's breaking a whole range of federal and state consumer laws and consumer financial laws, because the company you're communicating with, it's not the government. It's a private company with private liability and private obligations under a range of different laws. And so when you think about this like a lawyer, at least it was my experience kind of being a student loan borrower, struggling through the student loan system, becoming a lawyer, and then becoming an advocate. Like when you think about these problems as a consumer lawyer, the clouds part, and suddenly it all makes sense. You have this middle of a student loan system that's full of lawlessness, and taken together, it denies people their rights. And if you can address that lawlessness in the middle of the system, that's one of the ways you can help bring people back to even. It's much simpler and it's much faster to just cancel the debt. Like Persis is absolutely right. If Joe Biden did what we've asked him to do and just canceled the debt, we could not have a generation of people become student loan lawyers and help people navigate this mess. We're going to keep fighting for that. But in the interim, there needs to be justice and there needs to be accountability for the companies that are breaking the law. That's my shtick.
Thank you both. That was really, really helpful. So I was just going to open it up for conversation or questions from you guys at this point. I do have one of my own in sort of the news students perhaps can use department. So I want to ask both of you, and I guess either of you can take this on, but you both talked about some of the implications of the servicer exit. And I wonder about tips you might have for students who might be affected if, assuming you all know who your student loan servicers are, right? Of course. So if you're affected by this, are there steps you can take to be ready for the kinds of glitches that typically arise when there are these mass transitions? Any steps?
So I'm happy to take that. I mean, I think, you know, the assumption that people know who their servicer is, I think is, at least in my experience, not been borne out with the clients I serve. So I think that is probably step number one, is to figure that out. I mean, there's a number of things that, you know, for example, that I would take. First of all, yes, figure out who your student loan servicer is. From what I have heard, the little rumors in the backside, some of the folks who are getting transferred first are actually folks who are in school. So you all might be the first people to have your loans transferred out of Fed loan servicing if that is who your servicer is. And you can go to studentaid.gov to figure out who your servicer is. So that's I think that is the first step, is just figuring out that part. You know, all the problems that Mike described are really real. That they keep terrible records of payments that folks have made. Of I have concerns about deferments and counting time. Try to get payment histories. it's a hard thing to do. It's a hard thing to actually get, but, you know, to the extent that you have documents, you can get documents, you should get them. To the extent that, you know, you have your own records, you should keep them. And then just, you know, stay on top of the news. I think I want to say that it's really unfortunate, in my opinion, that I think people need to do these things. And so I always hesitate with these answers, because I think the answer should be, you don't need to do anything. It should work. But unfortunately, the reality is that it doesn't. And so, you know, in order to protect yourself, I think you just have to, you know, cover your ass, you know, get everything you got, and hold on to it.
That's good advice.
Oh. All right, we have
general life advice too. So
that is also good life advice. All right, we have a question in the room. I don't know if you guys can see it. Please.
I have a question. I saw news from the Orange County about a largest student debt loan relief fraud. I think this was on Tuesday. Last week. Today? Not two days ago. Yeah. And as you're speaking to like folks being transferred, what are some, I don't know, I think what are some points to raise as people are like navigating this transfer and navigating potential like schemes like this one in Orange County?
Are you guys familiar? This is our Attorney General's latest. Are you familiar, Persis and Mike, with what this one is?
I could take an educated guess because they're all a flavor of the same whack-a-mole scam that has proliferated over the past decade. But some tips on scams generally, and Persis, you should certainly take a chunk of this too. There are these companies, and I think there's a line by my former boss that I love to recite when people talk about student loan scams, which is sloppy servicing spawn scams. If the student loan companies you depend on did their jobs and people actually got their rights under the law, there wouldn't be a space for scammers to operate, because this would be simple. And the problem in the student loan market, which is a little bit different than people losing their homes to foreclosure in Orange County 10 years ago, you do have these rights. They're real rights. You can get a lower monthly payment if you can figure out how to connect the dots. And so all of these scammers have popped up, and they tread on the terrible reputation that companies like Navient and Fed Loan Servicing have for screwing people's lives up. And they do that by finding people that have slipped the cracks that are desperate and that can't afford their payments. And they charge them money, sometimes a lot of money, sometimes a little bit of money every month for years, to help them access these rights and protections that are free under the law. And half the time, they don't even bother to do the paperwork for you. And you end up without an affordable monthly payment or a path to loan forgiveness. And you've just paid some scammer some money to get what you could get on your own if the student loan system worked properly.
What's really tragic about this particular instance is apparently many of the victims paid the fees to the scam artists and then thought that their loan were no longer their obligation. Mm-hmm. So then they fell behind in their student loan obligations, which were real and which had not been addressed, in addition to paying money to the scammers. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think, I mean, that's super common. And some other pieces of it are, they take nuggets of truth, right? As Mike mentioned, right? That like forgiveness is a thing that exists in the world, sure. But then they shrink it. So instead of 10 years for public service loan forgiveness, they shrink it to 2 or 3. A lot of them do take over your account so that it gets harder to get those notices. So they'll take over, they'll change your address to their address. They'll change your email to their email, their phone number, et cetera. So it becomes harder. And then the end result, which I think is always worth mentioning, is that these folks do fall into default, and that is really, in addition to having their money taken out of their bank account regularly, and that being actually kind of complicated to turn off, folks fall into default, and the consequences of default are really bad in the federal student loan system. It's wage garnishment without ever going to court. If you receive Social Security, that can be taken. Your tax refunds are taken. So it is a big problem, but I agree with Mike that it's spawned because there's an opportunity, because folks are frustrated dealing with their servicers.
Yes.
I have a tip about this is your student loan servicer will never call you on the phone. So if you're like getting voicemails about a way to change your plan or something like that, yep, that's not usually them. And two, if you're ever suspicious, you can always call your loan servicer directly and ask them, you know, did you send me this communication, just to make sure.
The third flag, those are both perfect. And the third flag that I think we always share is that nobody's ever going to charge you an upfront fee to enroll in a program if they're representing that they're your student loan company. Like Navient's never going to call you and ask you to pay a fee to access income-driven repayment, or Fed Loan Servicing is not going to call you and have you pay a fee to certify your employment for public service loan forgiveness. The upfront fees, there's lots of circumstances where there are nonprofit credit counselors, legal services providers that have fee arrangements to provide you with actual services, but they're not doing direct marketing. They're not representing that they're the Department of Education, and they're certainly not representing that they're your student loan company. If they're trying to get money out of you on the phone to do document preparation and they're telling you they're the Department of Education or your student loan company, you know something's wrong.
Others? Yes.
I have a question. If debt forgiveness and income repayment plans, I'm wondering if they're reliable, because that's what I was relying on, or should I put interest for a couple years and just pay off my debt? Like, what do you recommend?
There's a heart-rending question. You guys can take that. Did you guys hear? Could you guys hear?
Yeah, so the question is like, can we trust the student loan system to actually work? Is I think the end of the day, right? That there are these programs that exist, and if I do them, will it work out? I mean, it's a hard question to answer. I often joke, you know, in order to figure out how to navigate the student loan system perfectly, you need a lawyer, an accountant, and a fortune teller. You know, so much of the system, I mean, because part of the thing is even if things are working as they intend, you know, it's an all or nothing system, right? Public service loan forgiveness, it's 10 years of public service, 9 years and 11 months is not going to cut it, right? Income during payment, you know, similarly, like you got to get to the end before it pays off. And so it's really high stakes. And I think for me, like, do the programs work? Well, if you do it perfectly, yes. You know, 32 people did get their loans canceled under, you know, income during payment. So like those 32 borrowers are doing okay. But yeah, there's a lot of pitfalls. You know, life happens, and and that can be a problem, and it can trip folks up. And then there are just a lot of pitfalls, you know. I mean, in my own loan situation, you know, I tried to switch repayment plans, and it took 7 months. It took 7 extra months to, you know, switch from income-based repayment into the revised pay-as-you-earn. And like, I had to go into a forbearance, and I like literally write a legal treatise on student loan repayment issues. So you have to be perfect, and like, and even knowing all the things, which is a lot, and most people don't, is not always enough.
I think the fortune teller part is also important. Like, it is actually meaningfully better today to work in public service and be pursuing public service loan forgiveness than it was in 2007 when the program was first created. And you couldn't fill out a form to have the government check up on your student loans. The advice you got from your student loan company was like, keep your pay stubs and talk to us later. And things are slowly getting better gradually. And we're pushing the Biden administration to go much bigger. And actually, if you worked in public service and dealt with some of the stuff before you went to law school, or if you're working full time right now and you have an experience you want to share, up until tomorrow, the Biden administration is taking comments from individual public service workers about their experience with student debt, working in public service. And the ask that we're making to the administration is to just simplify everything, to give people credit for the time they've worked in public service. And I listed a bunch of ticky-tack things that you have to do. Right now, in this moment, because of the pandemic, the education secretary can sweep all that stuff away. There are some really interesting administrative law questions about whether that's a thing Congress could delegate to the administration, but it appears that the secretary has these awesome emergency powers. And it's the same thing that they've used to waive people's monthly student loan payments during the pandemic. And if the Biden administration wanted to, they could fix this mess for every single public service worker that's been in the system for a decade. And this is kind of our moment. This is our opportunity to do that. And if they do, and we're really hopeful, it's also a good sign about the administration's philosophy about all of these other tricks and traps. Like, we could be living in a world that by the time you all are all done with law school, the student loan system is much simpler and these rights and protections feel much less illusory.
Okay, these programs exist and they do work. I literally got an email 2 hours ago from a grad who participated in LREP who got her loans forgiven last night from PSLF. So it happens. You just have to do it right. I think as law students and future lawyers, you're very, very well set up to be one of the successful participants in PSLF, and you're going to have the help of our office who can help you along the way. Even when your loan servicer in the Department of Ed is not being helpful, don't let it change your whole career trajectory. If you are interested in public interest, you can make it happen.
And candidly, I did have my loans canceled under public service loan forgiveness, so it is possible. But it's just important to, again, you have to be perfect, and it's a hard thing to do.
If anyone can do it, though, it's a bunch of Berkeley law grads.
That's right.
Can I add to this? I'm actually in public service loan forgiveness right now, and I started in 2011, and the difference has been dramatic. It was terrible in 2011, and I'm sure before that, and it was really hard to give a lot of the documentation, a lot of proof that I actually made payments. In fact, I'm not 3.5 years away from the 10-year mark, but just this summer, I got some payments approved that they were not approved previously from 2014. And I had to go back and I had to prove that I did make those payments, that I wasn't at a public service job. So I think it's changed a lot, and I think it's gotten a lot better. And like Amanda said, we're here to help you guys, not only doing other stuff professionally, but also personally, we're in it with you guys. So yeah, I would definitely, I think it's important to talk to us before making any decisions.
There are really two sets of issues. One is, can anyone obtain it? The answer is yes. Is the system well designed to favor the borrower, to ease the process? No, which goes to the possibilities of regulatory reform that Persis and Mike already alluded to. Yeah.
Can I just jump in because I can't help myself? I think the other piece is that, how do we right? We're lawyers or aspiring lawyers. How do we remedy the fact that for years it hasn't been working, right? So how do you remedy for years people have been working in public service and they haven't gotten it? So it's great that we're making things better, but I am a litigious lawyer and I want to know how we can get remedies for people who have been harmed for decades beforehand too.
Yeah, thanks for being patient, please.
For sure, and thank you both so much for coming. Just to even take a step back, I had no idea this was even an issue until 35 minutes ago. So I had no idea it was an issue until now. I'm thinking that there's a lot of us that do not know that, and there's not even 51 else in this class. So a lot of us are unaware still. I think information asymmetry is a really serious problem. So for students from marginalized and low-income backgrounds. So my question is, where does that responsibility lie to educate those students? Is it in people that have access to us, like maybe our financial aid office? Or is it a consumer law professor that we just cart around to every class? How do we do that? And where does that responsibility lie?
Now we're talking. I'd like the consumer law professor in every class. Sorry, go ahead.
I'll take a third shot at that, maybe. I think you're right that the schools have a role here. Your student loan company has a role here. The education department has a role here. But state government also does. And that's a nice thing about being in California. That's hopefully going to get a little bit better and a little bit different than big chunks of the country. California put in place a student borrower bill of rights a year ago, thanks to a lot of hard work from a bunch of the folks in this room. And one of the things that entitles you to is the ability to get redress, as Persis mentioned, when things go wrong, but also affirmative obligations on your student loan company to tell you about what your rights are, to help you connect the dots, to train their staff appropriately, to not cheat and lie to you. And that's something that didn't exist in California law, or frankly, in any law anywhere in the country with any specificity, if you go back even 5 or 6 years ago. So one of the things that's changed as lawmakers realize this is a problem, which is certainly something happening faster than most borrowers are realizing this is a problem. But as lawmakers are realizing this is a problem, they are trying to be more creative and to figure out how you can use legal tools at every level of government to try to close those information gaps.
And I think the other piece is that, yeah, I mean, this asymmetry absolutely exists. And I think, you know, we serve some of the most low income vulnerable borrowers. And I think that, you know, they don't have the resources of, you know, Berkeley financial aid. And many of them did not go to school. You know, they went to for-profit schools, and many of them, a lot of the problems, you know, stem from the fact that they went to really shady schools who were basically just, you know, using them for their financial aid dollars. So part of the answer, in my opinion, also has to be that, like, things just need to be easier, right? That you shouldn't need to know all the things in order to navigate the system. You know, we have an income during payment, you have to recertify your income every single year. And for a plan that lasts 20 or 25 years, that means you have 20, 25 opportunities to fail and to not get your paperwork in time. And so there are ways that we can make these things easier. We can, you know, Congress in 2019 passed the Future Act, which, you know, says that the Department of Education and the IRS are supposed to talk in order to get income documentation. So you don't have to do this process every single year. We have matching programs between the Social Security Administration and the department to identify people who should get their loans canceled. And so one of the actions that Biden has taken recently was to like automatically cancel those loans of those folks. Because it turned out that notifying people it wasn't enough for this population, and less than a third of folks were getting the cancellation. So we just need to make things easier and more automatic so that we don't, that this asymmetry, I mean, this asymmetry is always going to exist, and like you can't put the onus on a borrower to somehow bridge that gap.
Having said that, one other thing I would add is before you enter repayment, you will be that much further through law school. You will be a very sophisticated consumer of credit by the time you're done. So you will be well advised, right, with the help of the financial aid office experts, and you will be able to think like a lawyer about the different repayment plans, the consequences of those plans. All of this complexity plays to what law school's teaching you to navigate. But that doesn't mean it's a well-designed system, which is why Persis and Mike are so busy. There are other questions? Yes, please.
I have one easy question and then a slightly different question. The first is, if there is loan cancellation, is it likely to affect current borrowers, which is everyone in this room? And then, are there any proposals to lower the interest rate? That's one thing that seems crazy to me. Is like so much cheaper to borrow money for almost anything else. And then, like, my first year, I think the loans were 6 and 7% and change, and now it's like 4 and 5, which is a pretty high interest rate, I think. So, yeah.
Yeah. Can I answer the interest rate one, guys, and then hand it over? I mean, so the interest rate is set by statute, right? Pegged to the government's cost of borrowing. And the reason I'm smiling, you can't see I'm smiling behind the mask, but I'm smiling because when they first were drafting the legislation that became the Higher Education Act that included the creation of this fledgling loan program that has now become this monstrous thing, they were complaining about the interest rates that students had to pay to get just loans from a bank to pay for school. And if you think about what a bank would charge you when you have no collateral, no job, and you're just going to school and afterwards, look, I promise I'll do my best to pay it back. Those interest rates really were crazy, right? Multiples of the rates we're talking about now. So the rate students are getting is effectively subsidized. It's just high relative to other kinds of consumer debt, especially where there's collateral that you've got to work with. The deeper question, and this is my hobby horse, is why are we allocating the cost of the education onto the student who's least well placed to pay it anyway? But that's my pet speech. Okay.
One of the other really deep inequities in the way that we price student loans is that you guys aren't going to get stuck with those 7 and 8% interest rates once you get out of school and you get good jobs as lawyers. You're going to go walk across the street to SoFi and get your loans refinanced at 3%, 3.5%, while everyone that did try to use the student aid system to climb the economic ladder, particularly for those that are just going to undergrad and are just doing or going to community college, they're the ones that are going to get stuck with the high rate loans for a decade. And for whatever reason, like to Jonathan's point, this was all created, the whole structure was created in a much higher interest rate environment where there wasn't that market opportunity for the people that are the winners and high rate debt stuck for everybody else.
Oh, but you also asked about cancellation for current borrowers, right? As opposed to just the one time. You guys are more in tune with what's being talked about now.
I mean, I think the short answer is all to be determined. You know, and certainly, I think that level of detail is not there, but you know, we're trying to get it for as many people as possible, I think is the short answer. Is that like my goal is that everyone who has student loan debt, you know, gets the benefit of cancellation. And you know, I mean, I think that, I'm not sure if I heard the question if it was about a future looking prospect, but certainly, you know, I think the corollary is that we do need to work towards making sure that going to school is cheaper, you know, so that it doesn't result in this runaway student loan debt. So I think there's both the backwards, cancel as much debt as possible, and forwards, like try to prevent the creation of as much debt as possible.
I think we have time for one more.
Sure.
Please.
Thanks. As you're preparing for the rulemaking negotiations, what do you anticipate being like the most compelling pushback to your proposals to like clear out the books for borrowers with the lowest amount of money, and how are you planning to address those?
That's a great question. I'm trying to think. There are rules around what I can say about the rulemaking, but you know, I mean, I think one of the things that's very challenging with these proposals is, I mean, that they at least in some ways of accounting cost a lot of money, and so that is one thing that we're always dealing with. Now, I think some of this is funny money. You know, when we talk about the ways that interest rates are calculated, the way that interest rates are charged, and then they're capitalized, meaning that borrowers have their outstanding interest applied to their principal, and then they're charged interest on interest. But, you know, so I think the cost is one of the things that folks are, is one of the pushbacks that we often get. You know, and I think one of the things that we always encounter is also the idea of this moral hazard of, if we do things for borrowers, is that going to, you know, unfairly, you know, give them an advantage. And so to the later point, I mean, I think to both points, right, is the system hasn't been working. And the reason why we have so much debt is because the system hasn't been working. And so we ballooned to 1.7, 1.8 trillion. In large part, not just because, you know, folks are going to really expensive schools, but because like that debt is actually ballooning. You know, we just did a quick and dirty analysis of some data we got from Navient that showed, you know, 2/3 of borrowers in income driven payment are underwater, right? So their balances are now higher than they were when they left school. So that's one of the things that we do to counter it. The other thing that we do is, you know, as the seat that I will occupy is the legal aid seat, so representing legal aid organizations, and you know, we're working on getting borrower stories so that people understand the real life impact of this debt on folks, that, you know, folks are deferring, you know, plans, that like I've had clients, you know, not be able to afford, you know, back to school clothes or diapers for their children because of, you know, some of these consequences of the debt. And so like these consequences are real, and I think people need to hear these stories. And so that's one of the things that we think is super important to bring to these negotiations.
So I think we're at time. So Mike, right?
I have three things.
Okay, we're at time.
We're at time, and so these are closing things, which will include thanking them. The first, please make sure you sign the sign-in sheet. Second, behind you. Second, there's lunch. It's on the east.
Yeah, it's in the east courtyard by the, just head out past the Mackenzie Robinson is waiting over by the concrete steps.
I suspect there's going to be enough for you to take some for your friends too. But definitely please join us in that. And then finally, Mike and Persis, if people here are really interested in this work, is this something that they could do with you at your organization? Say as summer interns or externs during the year?
And student writing, Ted. Lots of student writing. We have had Berkeley students write papers and publish papers with us. We have had students from across the country write general counsel style memos, helping us think through legal issues and strategy. We love students. We love student writing. Come help us cancel some student debt.
Thank you guys very much. Thank you all for coming today.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.